If you're still treating the Switch 2 as just another Nintendo handheld, 2026 is the year that will put that doubt to rest. Nintendo itself has already started warming up the crowd by talking about several releases arriving throughout 2026 on the Switch 2, meaning it's not just a theory. The calendar is already getting stacked. So today, I've set aside 10 AAA games that honestly, you cannot miss. There are games for those who live for cinematic campaigns, brawlers to test your buttons, and the kind of production that makes you think, okay, now I'm truly in a new handheld generation. And a fair warning, some of these names look like they'll dominate the conversation all year long, so stay with me until the end, because the list starts strong and only gets better. I'm Mary, and the video is about to begin. When I saw the trailer of Leon in Resident Evil Requiem for the first time, my heart raced as if I were running from a tyrant in Raccoon City all over again. This 9th main entry in the series arrives on February 27th, 2026 for the Nintendo Switch 2, and promises to be a requiem for the dead and a nightmare for the living, as they say. It's a return to the roots of survival horror, but with all the power of the RE engine running beautifully on the Switch 2, ray tracing and all. The plot revolves around Grace Ashcroft, an FBI analyst investigating the hotel where her mother was murdered, with possible ties to Alyssa from Outbreak, and the legendary Leon S. Kennedy, who returns with his chainsaw and everything for a parallel investigation into strange deaths linked to the 1998 Raccoon City incident. Their fates intertwine in this abandoned and destroyed Raccoon City, full of mysteries, Umbrella, and a man named Victor Gideon as a person of interest. To me, this screams nostalgia mixed with freshness, like reliving RE2 and RE3, but with emotional twists that left me anxious to dive in. You can choose between first-person or third-person view, which is perfect for your style. Stealth and terror with Grace, or pure action with Leon, shooting, punching, and exploding zombies. It features tense combat, classic puzzles, resource management, and exploration in settings like the RE2 police station, all more immersive than ever on the Switch 2. I love how it balances spine-chilling horror with adrenaline-fueled moments, and the handheld gameplay looks solid, running at 600p with minimal downgrades that don't lose the shine. On the Nintendo Switch 2, Requiem runs impressively, with lighting and ray tracing almost intact, despite a lower internal resolution to keep a stable 30-60 FPS. It wasn't in Capcom's initial plans, but they optimized it for handheld, proving that heavy ports like this work well, similar to The Witcher 3 on the original Switch. For someone who plays anywhere, like me, this is gold. Imagine the terror on a train with the Joy-Con vibrating during scary cutscenes. Man, Requiem really got to me because it unites the best of classic RE with innovation, pure horror for those who love survival, like I do, and action to talk about with friends. On the Switch 2, it will be my choice to play on the couch or on the go, seeing Leon back with Grace, promising a narrative that goes from creepy to epic.
Never. Think I want a second opinion.
Set on an abandoned lunar station filled with crazed AIs and killer robots, Pragmata uses the RE engine for jaw-dropping graphics, featuring ray tracing and a futuristic vibe that runs smoothly on the Switch 2 in handheld mode. For me, someone who loves survival with twists, this is like a 9th Resident Evil in space, but fresh and innovative. The story follows Hugh Williams, an investigator trapped in a lunar earthquake who is saved by the android Diana. Together, they fight to return to Earth from a Delphi Corporation base taken over by machines. Hugh is the sarcastic and kind guy who shoots at everything, while Diana hacks through systems with childlike curiosity and deep mysteries. Their chemistry builds an emotional narrative in dark, crazy 3D printed environments. I love how it explores themes of human versus AI, leaving me wondering how Diana will evolve and if Hugh will survive the lunar chaos. Combat is a co-op experience where you control Hugh for direct action and Diana simultaneously to hack enemy armor via quick minigames, revealing weak points for precision shots. There are puzzles that use her unique skills, tense exploration in abandoned stations, and gunfights with varied weapons against legions of robots. It's real-time strategy that punishes mistakes. On the Switch 2, this shines in handheld, with fluid controls and optimization that makes me imagine adrenaline-filled night sessions. Pragmata arrives optimized for the Switch 2 as a recent novelty, running stably with a demo already on Steam for testing and coming to console soon, proving Capcom masters heavy sci-fi ports. Expect 30 to 60 FPS with visuals faithful to the RE engine, even in handheld mode, without sacrificing lunar immersion. For someone who plays in any corner like I do, it's perfect. The Joy-Con will shake with hacks and space explosions. Pragmata won me over with its dynamic duo and unique combat that mixes hacking with gunplay, ideal for sci-fi fans like me who want something beyond zombies.
Hello, unregistered guests. Your presence here is a violation of Cradle Security Protocol.
007 First Light is a third-person action-adventure game from IO Interactive, the masters of Hitman. It arrives on March 27, 2026 for Nintendo Switch 2, PS5, Xbox Series, and PC, with insane visuals and handheld optimization that runs smoothly at 60 FPS. For me, as someone who enjoys stealth and tense shootouts, this is the perfect spy for the Switch 2, mixing high-tech gadgets with pure adrenaline in breathtaking global locations. The story begins with James Bond as a heroic sailor recruited for the 00 program, but a mission against a rogue agent turns into a tragedy, forcing him to ally with a reluctant mentor, Greenway, to unmask a conspiracy at the heart of the British Empire. It features iconic cameos like M, Q, and Moneypenny, guiding the young 007 in an original narrative inspired by Fleming and the films, full of emotional twists. I feel this captures a raw Bond, learning the hard way, and it makes me anxious to see how he becomes the icon we love. The game is pure third-person with lethal stealth, brutal hand-to-hand combat, cinematic gunfights, and cutting-edge gadgets for epic infiltrations. Think Hitman meets Bond, with choices that change missions and open exploration. On the Switch 2, the Joy-Con controls shine in handheld stealth, with ray tracing and optimized performance for handheld without losing the glamour. I love how it balances explosive action with tense investigation, punishing mistakes but rewarding creativity. Perfect for my quick sessions. Natively optimized for Switch 2, it runs at 1080p docked and 720p handheld with stable 60 FPS, using the power of the new hardware for snowy scenes and sunny beaches without lag. IO proved with Hitman that they dominate ports, and this will be no different. Imagine gadgets vibrating in the Joy-Con during infiltrations. For those who play on the move like me, it's the ideal spy-on-the-go experience. 007 First Light caught my attention with its young and vulnerable Bond, featuring spy mechanics that elevate the genre into something fresh and replayable. On the Switch 2, it becomes my definitive travel game, mixing nostalgia with innovation that fans of retro action will love.
do, James?
Lately, headhunting.
Yakuza, Kiwami 3, and Dark Ties is a 2-in-1 package arriving on the Nintendo Switch 2 on February 12, 2026, combining a full remake of Yakuza 3 with a brand new, separate story focused on Yoshitaka Mine. For me, the big draw here is the contrast in atmosphere. In Kiwami 3, Kiryu tries to live that borrowed peace in Okinawa, running the Morning Glory orphanage, but the game makes it clear that this calm is fragile, and someone is always ready to turn paradise into a battlefield. And since this is Yakuza, it's not just drama, it's the kind of story where a political or real estate detail becomes an excuse for brawling, moral dilemmas, and decisions that stick in your memory. On the Kiwami side, what stands out most is that they aren't selling it as a remaster. The official description calls it an extreme remake, with reimagined combat, additional cutscenes, and new or improved side activities to make Okinawa and Kamurocho feel more alive. From what's been revealed, you can switch between two fighting styles, Dragon of Dojima Kiwami, more brutal, high impact, and Ryukyu style, which leans into weapons and techniques inspired by traditional Okinawan arts, utilizing different weapon types. Now, Dark Ties is the part that hits me most emotionally because it's that what if Yakuza fans love. You control Mine for the first time, and the game tries to explain his downfall, from a guy with a respectable life and company to someone who chooses to sink into the underworld. The official premise talks about his search for true bonds, which fits the series perfectly, as it constantly proves that family can be a refuge or a chain. In terms of gameplay, Dark Ties seems to want to differentiate itself clearly from Kiryu. Combat is centered on boxing, with a mode called Dark Awakening to enter a rampage state and finish with more brutal strikes, plus a Hell's Arena mode with different rules, including a resistance or dungeon-style survival hell with waves of enemies. Meanwhile, Kiwami 3 features a new mode with that big mini-game feel the franchise is known for, Legendary Baddie Bad Boy Dragon, where you build a biker gang and fight in teams alongside the Ryukyu Gal Gang. This package seems designed for two desires at once, finally giving Yakuza 3 a modern treatment in combat and visuals, while giving a stylish spotlight to an antagonist many have always wanted to understand from the inside.
We're all adequate graduates, hearts full of calluses, but we know calculus. Damn, ain't that fabulous? Can't wait to apply all those mathematicus. But we can't get a job that pays us enough. I'm about to pop off. Fuck you, you're lost. We all know that we never.
The Duskbloods is a new multiplayer action game from Software, arriving exclusively for the Nintendo Switch 2 sometime in 2026. The pitch here isn't just another Souls clone. It's born with PvP VE at its core and support for up to 8 players online, so the feeling promises to be much more of a competitive hunt than a solitary journey. The vibe is dark fantasy that clearly flirts with blood, curses, and rituals. Even the tagline, "Lunar tears shall flow for one and only one," feels like that kind of short prophecy Software loves. Simple on the outside, but heavy with meaning. And for me, that's the perfect hook. It's the kind of game that starts with a strong mystery, pulling you in through curiosity before even explaining the how and why of the world. What sets it apart immediately is the focus on the blood sworn. Instead of just create your character and be miserable, the idea is to choose between vampiric or vampire-like characters with their own weapons and abilities, which totally changes how you read builds and identity within a match. In other words, it seems less about your character and more about your style, who you choose to be in that lobby and how that interacts with your team and your enemies. Structurally, the official description hits the PvP-VE angle hard. You can imagine matches where the map's monster is just as dangerous as an invading player, and the game pushes you into a constant dilemma between cooperating now or betraying later. This dynamic is what I want to see working the most, because when it hits, it creates spontaneous stories, that hard-fought victory that didn't just come from reflexes, but from reading intentions, bluffing, repositioning, and choosing the right moment to go all in. It also stands out that it was announced as online multiplayer action and as a project directed by Hidetaka Miyazaki, which automatically raises expectations for art direction and the weight of encounters, even in a more competitive format. And yes, comparisons to Bloodborne will pop up all the time because the blood aesthetic invites it, but the reality is that the Duskbloods seems to want to be its own thing, a dark battlefield with gothic fantasy and match objectives, not necessarily a traditional linear adventure. The detail that keeps my curiosity piqued is precisely that for one and only one. If this is the central goal of the match, like fighting for a resource, a status, a first blood, or an artifact, a very addictive just one more loop could emerge. If it nails the balance between PvE threat and PvP paranoia without becoming an unfair mess, it has everything to be that exclusive that defines the conversation in 2026 on Switch 2. PI for Hire is a black and white noir FPS with a 1930s rubber hose aesthetic, set for release on March 19, 2026. To me, it already wins points just for having the guts to mix fast-paced shooting with the look of an old cartoon, because that totally changes how you read the action on screen. Everything looks light and funny until it turns into chaos in seconds. The charm begins with the contrast. You are in a corrupt city, Mouseburg, living a case of crime and corruption, but with characters who look like they jumped straight out of an old projector. This clash between visual innocence and cartoonish violence is the kind of thing I love because it leaves every corner with that "this is going to go wrong" feeling, but with style. In combat, the game sells the idea of a fast-paced FPS where constant movement is key, so it doesn't seem like a static, peeking hallway shooter. It's about running, sliding, repositioning, and surviving to the rhythm of jazz. And the promise of an arsenal with more than a dozen weapons and gear with a cartoon touch is exactly what gives this game personality, because a weapon here isn't just for damage, it's a visual gag, timing, and a spectacle. What leaves me most curious is the Metroidvania spice in traversal. Besides shooting, you unlock movement abilities and use them to explore maps in a less linear way. When an FPS understands that mobility can be progression and not just speed, the game gains a layer of "I want to go back there later" that is usually missing in more traditional shooting campaigns. Structure-wise, the campaign is single-player and promises over 20 levels with a noir atmosphere, filled with enemies and underworld figures, mice, rats, and shrews, which suggests a variety of scenarios and encounters, and that matters a lot in a game that lives on style. If each stage has its own idea, a visual trick, a type of arena, an enemy with a striking pattern, that number could mean a well-paced journey without filler. Finally, the icing on the cake is the soundtrack. The game highlights an original big band jazz score, which fits perfectly with the hard-boiled detective fantasy in a cartoon world. The kind that makes you want to play with headphones just to feel the swing dictating the pace of the gunfight. And if the movement is truly as important as they promise, this soundtrack could become the perfect metronome for the gameplay. Dragon Quest VII Reimagined arrives on the Nintendo Switch 2 on February 5th, 2026, bringing a reconstruction of the classic with a diorama look, a more direct story, and turn-based combat that is much more agile than the slow reputation 7 carried for years. For me, the hook of this game remains one of the strongest in the series. You are a simple boy from Estard, living on an island that seems to be the whole world, until you and your friends find the Shrine of Mysteries and are thrown into the past, discovering entire lands were sealed away by an evil force. And what I like here is that the adventure doesn't have that save the universe just because energy. It's born of curiosity, of youthful stubbornness, and then scales into a huge responsibility. The great structural differentiator remains intact and is the reason I find 7 so unique. You piece the world together by finding stone fragments that open portals to lost eras, solving problems in the past to return islands and life to the present. This transforms the game into a sequence of vignettes with their own mysteries, yet connected by a larger thread. And Nintendo itself describes the main narrative as streamlined, so the promise here is to keep the essence without trapping you in excessive padding. Now, talking about the actual reimagined part, the visuals seem to want to win you over with handcrafted care, featuring a diorama style and a presentation that Square Enix describes as a living storybook. Square also says that the characters, with designs by Akira Toriyama, were reinterpreted in charming 3D using real-world physical figures as a base, which explains that tactile, almost animated miniature feel. In gameplay, the message is clear. The turn-based combat has been tweaked to be more dynamic, with speed adjustments, auto battle, and even battles that can flow without interruption between turns, depending on the tactics chosen. And the part that calls to me most, the vocation system has been updated with moonlighting, which lets you use 2 vocations at the same time, accessing skills and perks from both, alongside mechanics like Let Loose and a Monster Master vocation with a summoning perk, according to Square's press release.
I'd regret missing out on the fun far more than any bother we might get ourselves into.
I haven't thought about it really. I should try doing all the things that humans do.
To find my own purpose, something only I can do.
Did he prevail? Doth he yet rule over this realm?
This is the stuff! You and me battling side by side again. Flame Splitter!
Spine is a single-player action game with a narrative focus set in a cyberpunk future dominated by AI and is confirmed for the Nintendo Switch 2. For me, the immediate appeal of Spine is that promise of a playable action movie without apologies. You control Redline, a rebellious street artist, accompanied by a sentient combat implant called Spine, and the duo goes on a collision course with a corporate/technocratic regime, Tensor Corporation, that controls the city. I like it when cyberpunk moves away from neon for neon's sake and becomes a stage for down-to-earth rebellion. And here, the idea of being a street artist adds a different flavor to the anti-establishment cliché. The heart of the game is the free-flow gun-fu, which basically mixes brawling and chain shooting. Redline moves from enemy to enemy, parrying, disarming, and using the opponent's own weapon to keep the combo alive. The detail that sells me on this is the explicit incentive to improvise with the environment, smashing enemies against surfaces, throwing them from heights, using improvised weapons, because that is usually what separates pretty action from action with expression. And there's a very clear philosophy behind this. The game director describes the system as an experience of constant tactical awareness, enemies plus environment, without taking control away from the player, specifically so you feel like the star and director of your own film. This kind of talk might be marketing, but it fits the proposal of a dynamic camera and more cinematic choreography, where the fight is as much about performance as it is efficiency. Another thing I found deliciously bold is the hardcore mode. Redline wears sunglasses, and if you finish the game without taking a hit, they remain intact, meaning the game gives you a visual trophy of style and consistency, not just a hidden score. It's a simple concept, but it's exactly the kind of gimmick that becomes a story to tell later. I beat it without breaking the glasses. Technically, the game is described as being made in Unreal Engine 5 and also using Necky's own animation engine, Cascadeur, with the promise of making every combat well choreographed and looking like a movie stunt.
I never asked for this.
Monster Hunter Stories 3: Twisted Reflection is Capcom's next story-rich turn-based RPG in the Monster Hunter universe, arriving on the Nintendo Switch 2 in 2026, with a date set for March 13th, 2026, according to official pages. From what's been shown, the promise is to continue the more JRPG-style approach of the story series, but with a larger conflict, a more living world, and that irresistible appeal of forming bonds with monsters that you don't just hunt, you raise and lead into battle. The starting point of the story already hooks me. Two twin Rathalos, born by a stroke of fate, rekindled the flames of a dormant war between two broken nations, Azuria and Vermeil. And you aren't just any protagonist, you are the heir to Azuria and the kingdom's only Rathalos rider, which gives it that narrative weight of everyone expects something from you, even when the world is crumbling around you. What I liked most about this premise is that it doesn't seem to be just politics and war. There's an atmosphere of mystery and strange phenomena threatening the world, and a decisive event pushes you beyond the meridian on a journey to discover the truth. This kind of hook is perfect for stories because the series has always worked best when it mixes grand adventure with intimacy. That feeling that your bond with your monstie is just as important as the next plot twist. In terms of identity, Capcom reinforces that this is the next evolution of the Monster Hunter Stories line, a turn-based RPG focused on story with an expansive world full of monsters to befriend, raise, and battle alongside. To me, this is the spice that differentiates stories from the main Monster Hunter. Here, the monster stops being just a boss and becomes a travel partner, a companion you shape throughout the campaign.
endangered species.
When we find an endangered species egg, we take it and hatch it. Then we can return it to the wild, bolstering the population.
Oh yeah, would you call it eco-restore?
Habitat restoration.
This is no relationship of convenience. We understand them and create the right environment for them to thrive. This is a ranger's duty we can fulfill.
Would you mind terribly if I gave you a hand with that particular process?
It looks like a Palico's gotta do what a Palico's gotta do, I suppose. Ready, and... Somnicat won't come back to get you.
You sure?
These kind folks drove the thing off.
Who are they?
LEGO Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight is a game that promises to be a true celebration of the Caped Crusader's journey, bringing the Gotham universe in LEGO bricks with a touch of nostalgia and a lot of fun. This time, TT Games bet on an original story that mixes classic elements from movies, comics, and series, creating an experience that feels made for fans of all Batman eras. The game will put you in the role of Bruce Wayne on his path to becoming the hero of Gotham, going through training with the League of Shadows and facing an iconic gallery of villains like the Joker, Penguin, Mr. Freeze, and Bane. You'll be able to form a family of allies, including Jim Gordon, Robin, Batgirl, and even Catwoman, each with their unique skills and gadgets, making the gameplay even richer and more varied. Gotham comes to life as an open world, full of crimes to solve, challenges, secrets, and collectibles scattered in every corner. You can explore the city by jumping across rooftops, using the grapple shot or bat glider, or even driving classic Batmobiles like the Tumbler to fight crime in the streets. It's a pleasure to navigate this brick-built Gotham, full of references and landmarks like Arkham Asylum and Wayne Tower. The combat system received an overhaul inspired by the Batman Arkham games with fluid combos, spectacular takedowns, and the strategic use of gadgets to face enemies. The gameplay is fast and satisfying, allowing you to feel like the true Dark Knight by defeating villains with style and creativity. Additionally, the game brings a huge variety of suits and vehicles, including looks inspired by the most famous comics and movies, plus a series of customizable items for the Batcave. Those who pre-order the game or opt for the deluxe edition will also get access to extra modes, such as Mayhem mode, where you can play as the Joker and Harley Quinn, as well as new exclusive suits and vehicles. LEGO Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight is a tribute to Batman's legacy, with the fun and accessible formula of LEGO games, but with an extra dose of action and depth that promises to please both those who grew up with the character and those who are discovering Gotham now. It's a game made for those who love Batman and want to experience his journey in a unique way, full of colorful bricks.
Hey, we got some snoopers over here.
It isn't time. Can't just yet.